This bench is broke and I'm gonna fix it. Hi, Dale coming to you from my garage again, and my son has a roommate that has this really nice dining room bench and it's broke. He asked me if I could fix it. So I said, hey, how about 7,500 bucks for the work to fix it? Negotiation started there, and I think I was pretty shrewd and a pretty good negotiator. We ended up at zero. Come on, let's go. To start, I turned it upside down so I could kind of take a look at what's going on. And I can see this back brace, it's very sturdy. It doesn't move at all, seems very solid. But this one on the side, this one's got a little bit of a wobble. This one here, very wobbly, very loose leg. And of course, the one that came across is completely come out. So I think the first thing I'm gonna do is take off these side ones, get them put back on nice and secure, and then worry about the top one, the front one. Okay, with this one, you can see it is very, very wobbly. This side here just comes completely out when the glue is completely failed. It's a fairly loose fit. This one here, though, has a screw. These both have pocket holes drilled in them, but this one does not have a screw. This one does, so I'm going to take this screw out. And that should allow me, to just pull this whole piece off. All right, so I'm going to take the screw out. I'm going to need to sand these down, sand out the insides, and because these are loose fits, I'm going to be using epoxy to put these back on. So I'm going to get the other leg taken off, and then I'll start with the sanding and fixing the sides. You can see those are very, very loose as well, so I'll sand those down and use epoxy to put those back in as well. To prep these, I'm going to need to sand off all of the old glue off of all of these tenons and also inside of the mortises on the main legs. And to do that, I'm starting with 80 grit. I'm just going to sand around these until all of the old glue is off on both sides as well as the mortises. That's going to allow me to have the glue really take hold. Now that I have all of the old glue sanded off, this tenon, it's ready to go. All I need to do is just brush off all the loose sawdust, make sure that I also clean out and sand out the mortise, and this one's ready to go. Just need to do that for the 3 others. Now that I have all 4 of the tenons sanded off down to bare wood, I cannot stress enough, that is probably the most important part of this fix, is to get these tenons down to bare wood so that all of the old glue is off. Now I need to do the same thing for all the mortises. And the easiest way I found to do that is just to take the same sandpaper, get it into about the same size as the hole into a cylinder, and just sand it out. Again. All right, now we're ready to epoxy them in. Remember, I'm using epoxy because these were pretty loose fit, and I don't think the glue would have been able to fill the gaps. So the epoxy should be able to fill those gaps. I am using this JB Weld. I've just picked it up at Home Depot. I've never used this type before, but I'm only going to put in enough to do one side at a time. That should be enough of that. And all you do is you put them in equal parts. Then you simply mix it together for, it says 1 minute. All right, I hope that's enough. I'm going to go ahead now and spread it around the mortises first and then the tenon. You want to make sure that you get it good and heavy in here. And I probably did not mix enough, but we'll see. So you want to get that spread around as best you can in there. Actually, I did not mix enough. I'm going to mix some more real quick. All right, so back to it. We want to get it in there as good as we can. We want to get a lot in there. Get it all around the sides. The next step is to get it on the mortises. You want to make sure that you cover these mortises very well as well. You want a good cover. There's that side. All right, next thing is to put it back in and clamp it down. Get that nice and tight. I'm also going to go ahead and tighten this leg on because I want to make sure that this leg is in the proper position. So I'm going to clamp it in before I clamp down. So now I know the leg is in a nice, good position. And now I'm just going to use these ordinary ratchet clamps. Get it nice and straight. And that should hold it. It needs to stay here for an hour, is what the instructions say, for it to cure.
And now for the other side, I do the same thing. I mix the epoxy. I first put it into the mortise and then completely cover each tenon and put it together and use my straps to hold it together while it cures.
So while I let that epoxy cure, takes about an hour according to the instructions. I'm probably going to give it a couple of hours. I can now start looking at the front cross support. And I'll give you a close-up here. On this side of the front cross brace, you can see that the tenon is pretty much still intact. There's a little bit right here that was chipped out. This is where a screw was going through it. But for the most part, I'm going to be able to use that. So just like the other one, I'm just going to need to sand off all the old glue and then reset this into the existing mortise with epoxy. Now the other side though, you can see that the tenon actually broke off. The bulk of it is still inside of the mortise. So I'm going to have to clean out all of the remaining tenon that's in here as well as in the mortise, and then cut a new floating tenon and epoxy that all together. The first thing I need to do as far as cleaning up the mortises is I need to get all of this wood out of this mortise. This is the tenon that broke off inside of the mortise. So the first thing I need to do is take the screw out, and oh, look at that. I'm getting pretty lucky. The entire mortise came out, so I don't have to drill anything out of this. I'll just need to sand it off. That's awesome. All right, it turns out that I think these were actually floating tenons and not very big ones either. I don't think these were that strong. Let me give you a close-up so I can show you how these were put together. All right, this is going to be a bit difficult to show on camera, but let me see if I can get it. You can see the hole that was drilled in, this pocket hole, was meant so that you could put a screw in there. The problem though is when you look at it through this way, right down through it, let me see if I can get that in focus, there's just not that much area for it to glue a tenon in there. So I believe the way this was working was just this little tiny piece. Let me see if I can get that in focus for you. There we go. Just this little bit of piece, this wood here, was really all that was holding it in. Everything else out here was drilled away for that pocket hole. So really there was only, what, about 1/4 of an inch holding this in. It fit in like this. And that's all there was that was holding that in. So what I'm going to try to do is, one, I'm going to have to cut a new floating tenon. I'm going to have to hog out some of this area in here so that I can give it a little bit more surface area inside of this hole to glue into. Or the problem that's going to be a little more difficult for me is this mortise here is actually smaller than the mortise that's inside the leg. So I'm going to do my best and see how it comes out. Now for a quick test fit. That should work just fine. So now what I'm going to want to do is I want to hog out a little bit of this. So I'm going to take a 1/4 inch Forstner bit, get it started pretty good, and then I'm going to do my best to drill out, I don't know, maybe a 1/2 inch or so to give me something more to have the floating tenon bite into. Now I'm going to take a chisel to it to kind of work it around a little bit, get it a little bit bigger. The smallest chisel I have is a 1/2 inch. It's just a pretty cheap old chisel. But let's see if I can just kind of clean this up a little bit. I don't want to take those rounded corners off, but if I have to, I will. I'm just trying to tap a little bit more wood away from that angled pocket hole that was drilled so that I can really let this floating tenon have something to bite into. Just got to go a little at a time, take it slow. My hand chisel skills are not even close to awesome, so it's just take it slow. That gives me a good 1/2 inch or so of wood for the glue to really grab onto that floating tenon. So I'm just going to clean up that a little bit more, and I will then start shaping the tenon. I've got the floating tenon shaped to fit into the leg. The problem is the mortise into the support piece is actually smaller. So what I've done is I've marked off the amount that goes into the leg, which is here, and then another mark here which should take me to the bottom of the mortise in the support. So now what I've done is I've come and I've marked these lines on how much I need to shave off, starting from this point here back to here. And then once I shave that part off, it'll be skinnier than the part that goes into the leg. The skinnier part will go into the support. I'll need to round off those edges as well, cut off here, and then I should have my floating tenon. You can see that I've got the blade just barely sticking up over it because I don't need to take off too much on each side. And I'm just going to come all the way back to here, just nibbling away a little at a time. That way I can cut off here and test. Now to show off my wicked, awful chisel work, I need to chisel off up to the line on each side. So I'm going to start by just kind of marking around each side to help me not tear that all apart when I get down there. Alright, so now I'm just going to take off. I think I'm just going to try to do it all. That isn't a lot. Let's see how that works. Actually, that came off pretty darn good. You want to get a lot of this epoxy in there. These, by the way, were a real pain to clean out. There was a ton of old glue or whatever in there. It was all gunked up in there. Now I'll get a good bit on each of the tenons. This one was the original one. It looked like it was in good enough condition to where I could just sand it down. And this is the one that I had to make. And I will say that this is probably the best freehand floating tenon that I've ever made. Now, it's also the worst one that I've ever made because this is the first one that I've ever had to make freehand. All right. I gave the epoxy a complete night to cure, and it is really, really solid. I'm all of 110 pounds, and when I shake it, there's no wobble at all. I think it's perfectly solid, not going to be a problem. I didn't end up putting the screws back in. I think the screws actually are part of what caused the problems. There were 3 screws in all 4 of the joints. 3 of the joints had screws, and one of the screws, and I'll show you a close-up, was actually bent pretty good. The other 2 screws are actually what caused the tenons to break. So not putting them back in, I think, is going to be the better choice, and just let the epoxy do its job. But right now, the only thing left is to deliver this to my son, haul it into their dining room, and have dinner. If you liked what you saw, please like, share, comment, subscribe if you want. Until next time, see ya.
Should we do anything in particular?